What's up, friends? Welcome in to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Sean Hammond, Shaw Local Bears beat reporter. He is Michael Dwojak, joining me as he does every episode. Shaw Local's very own sports enterprise reporter. Michael, we've reached the end of the year. We heard from Ryan Poles, George McCaskey, Kevin Warren yesterday. It was a busy day at Hallis Hall. In a lot of ways, though, at least to me, and I wrote about this over at shawlocal.com, it felt very similar to kind of what we've heard every single time the Bears do this.
Yeah, the whole thing was interesting yesterday where they put up Ryan Poles up there by himself, change out the table one day, and then they put in a podium just so it's Ryan Poles. So you're very clear, like, all right, this is gonna be a one-man show. And then all of a sudden it moves off to the side room. And we're talking to Kevin Warren and George McCaskey off. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. So we Ryan Poles kind of leading this, but also like these guys and like we learned in the press conference too, all these other different people and that sort of stuff. Yeah, more of the same. I feel like you continuously hear the same things. At this point, you're just kind of wondering, is anything going to be different with this coaching search was before? What has this organization earned at this point? George McCaskey was kind of asked that question, and then I feel like he kind of gave an answer, non-answer. We're like, well, we believe in Ryan, and that's the difference as opposed to maybe Ryan Pace before, to have got it since McCaskey took over in 2011. But you as a Bear for the best, but after going through that experience yesterday, I feel like that didn't really with as I'm heading into this coaching search.
Yeah, Michael, I'm getting some feedback on your end. I think Rick says in the comments that he's hearing an echo. Guys, let me know if you're hearing that as well. We'll get that straightened out. But yeah, I'm with you in that. Like, I don't know. The question was asked directly to George McCaskey. What's different this time? They've done this. I forget what the number is. 4 GMs and 6 head coaches, something like that, since George McCaskey took over in 2011. And he was asked directly, why is this different? It was Mark Potash with the Sun-Times who asked that question and followed up when George kind of gave a non-answer at first. And he said Ryan Poles has his experience. He has Kevin Warren in his corner, and he can lean on Kevin Warren's experience. And essentially, George McCaskey said he believes in those two guys. And that's the only thing that's making this difference. We learned that there's going to be this panel of a handful of different people from within the organization. All of them are within the organization. It's not like last time when or the last several times when they've had some Bill Polian helped out last time. No, this is all, at least at this point, this is all people within the Bears organization. But you have a panel. It sounds an awful lot like exactly what they did last time when they also had a panel of folks who were interviewing candidates. As much as we heard that this is going to be different, this is going to be, Kevin Warren is the guy in charge now. George McCaskey's still on that panel, so he is definitely going to have his opinions about these candidates when they get to that point. To me, it all sounds like the same thing that we've done before. The only difference is George McCaskey's belief in Ryan and Kevin to get it right. And I don't know if Bears fans feel that same confidence right now.
No, and let me know if this doesn't sound good. I changed out the microphone, but I would agree. I mean, you're just kind of hoping at this time. You're hoping, right? You're just kind of hoping for the best, and you kind of hope that they kind of learn from their past mistakes and they figured something out here because it's just kind of hard to kind of go through this process all over again. And I know that I saw some things going around yesterday where people were saying, well, the Packers have done the same thing, like they've talked to all these different people and different teams. It's just kind of doing the modern way of doing football now, where you include all these different people. But at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, this needs to be Ryan's decision, right? And he kept saying that yesterday. He kept saying that, it's my decision. I'm going to work with George and Kevin, but I'm the guy who's going to be making this decision. But I think you just need to, despite all these people who are going to be involved in this process, it needs to be Ryan's decision who's going to be this head coach. And, he can listen to so-and-so HR, he can listen to whatever and, take their input and be like, well, so-and-so has a good presence and that would be good for press conferences. And that's important stuff, right? Like that shouldn't be the determining factor, but you do want to look into all those types of things. And obviously based on how the past coaching regime kind of went on, maybe HR should be involved just based on what the rumors were and that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it needs to be Ryan's decision. And because ultimately this is his job, right? If he gets his head coach right, he gets to stick around, he gets to continue to build this thing. If he doesn't get this right, he's done, right? It's pretty much point blank, simple like that. So, there's a lot of people getting involved and it's maybe not ideal, but at the end of the day, if they do let Ryan make this decision, I think that's the only sound way of running this search, or you're just going to keep on doing the same thing you've been doing over the past 14 years at this point.
Yeah, and you do sound better, Michael. No Thanks. More echo. The decision is Ryan Poles, and that's very clear. I just am concerned about all the people, all the cooks in the kitchen, all the people who are gonna have their comments, their thoughts before you get to the finish line, and how that may or may not sway the GM. Ultimately, he's got to make this decision. And that's very clear. I know it was when they fired Flus and they trotted out Poles and Warren, it was they sort of made it clear, but they did it in a roundabout way. And that was very much the strong message yesterday was that this is Ryan Poles' decision ultimately, and as it should be. But my concern is just, all the voices who are going to be involved throughout the whole process. I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have multiple voices. I just think that it does feel kind of like you're doing the same thing over again and expecting different results.
Sure. And I would agree with that, right? Like, 'cause it hasn't worked before. That's the biggest thing, right? Like, I feel like you went through this experience, 3 years ago at this point when you're hiring Ryan and Matt. And that didn't work with Matt, obviously. And we're still trying to figure out whether that worked with Ryan. So I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to this organization, where it's just kind of like you're not seeing. Maybe it is happening in the background with Kevin Warren. Obviously, I know you hear about the spending, like he's giving every opportunity. He's changed, obviously, the look of the organization, bringing in a lot of senior vice presidents and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the coaching search, it doesn't seem like that's being changed. And I feel like that's that's probably the most important thing. Is all the other stuff, all the business side things are important. Obviously, you want to run a good organization that's going to make money. But at the end of the day, if your product isn't winning on the field, what does it really matter if all the other stuff is happening, right? And that's kind of the biggest thing. And I understand why you and other people would be concerned. Is just kind of like, what? This hasn't worked before. This process hasn't worked before. At least at this point, they're not using a Bill Polian. They're not using any like outside counsel other than maybe for background information. But it just does feel like, well, maybe this didn't work a few years ago. Maybe we should include all these different people in there. Maybe George shouldn't be involved as much. Obviously, he should have a say. He's the chairman. It's his team, right? But maybe he shouldn't be as involved as he was in the past searches. So, I would agree. It is concerning, and you would hope that they would learn, and maybe they did. Maybe Ryan's going to approach this much differently. I think there's just a bunch of uncertainty, and that's I think that's the biggest thing, right? There's a bunch of uncertainty with how much time is left on Ryan's, contract. How much is like? There's just too much uncertainty where you're just kind of like, well, why all this uncertainty, and why are we like guessing at this point?
Yeah, there's a couple different threads we can pull on some of the things we heard, and we'll go there since you just mentioned it. We don't know how long Ryan Poles' contract is. And Kevin Warren was asked about that, and he said something to the effect of, people make a lot of. He started his answer. Kevin Warren doesn't give short answers. He started his answer by saying that people make a lot of assumptions about certain things, and I think the fact, of course, that they're not telling us how long Ryan's contract is, we have to read between the lines, and that can mean one of two things. That can mean that Ryan isn't going into the last year of his deal. That's one thing. Or, I mean, you could read that as like the total opposite. You can say that's not something that they're concerned about. That's not, essentially that's kind of what they were saying, that's not going to affect. It seemed like that's what they were saying, that's not going to affect the coaching search. George McCaskey said that no coaching candidate has ever asked him how long the GM's contract is. And That kind of seems weird to me. Like, okay,
Yeah. If I'm a coaching, I want to know how long my general manager is there for. Or like that's a concern.
Certainly coaching candidates have asked you about the GM and how much you like him and how much faith you have in it. Like there's there's ways of like feeling that out, even if they don't ask directly, well, how long is his contract? I don't even know if I believe that though. I gotta feel like, how many coaching candidates have they interviewed over the last 15 years? You're telling me not one of them asked that question?
And I just don't get the secrecy of it all, right? Like, how long, Caleb has a contract for Jalen Johnson, like the money, like I as a fan, like, I don't care how much money, like, and Ryan Poles was asked about this and he said, like, he was asked about whether he was given an extension and he replied with, it's a personal matter. And I've said from the beginning, I don't talk about, the length of my contract or the money. And no one is wondering about his money. Like, to be quite frank, like, I don't care how much money he's making. I don't like that doesn't do anything. Like, I don't really care about that at all. But the length of the contract is important. And I don't really know why what is the point of hiding that, I guess. Like, and it's just, again, it goes to the organizational, dysfunction, for lack of a better word, of just being like, he's not answering that. Kevin Warren goes on the soliloquy about how, a year is a lifetime and goes into this big introspective conversation about what is a year, what is time. And you're just like, why? And then George McCaskey's talking about, obviously, like you mentioned earlier, about no one's question about that. It's just like, guys, why are we not making this simple? Just say how much time he has left. If he has 1 year, own up to it and say he has 1 year because he hasn't proven this or anything like that. Like, we still have questions about Ryan and this is his opportunity to prove it. Or they can say, oh, we gave him a contract, last year and now like extension and now he's on 2 years as opposed to 1 year. Like, again, it's just like this secrecy and, adding more of a spotlight onto yourself when you don't need to, or it's just kind of like, if I'm an outside candidate, if I'm, let's say, Ben Johnson, and I am the top candidate, or Mike Vrabel in this pool, and I probably have the pick of the litter, and I can go anywhere. From a non-biased view, yes, I have Caleb Williams, I've got cap space, and I've got draft picks. But then this stuff doesn't leave me encouraged, right? Like, heading into this, like, I'm just kind of like, well, why are you guys making this more difficult? And what is it going to be when I'm the head coach? Am I going to be involved in this? And are you going to put me in bad situations in front of the media and that sort of stuff? Are you going to make me do an a media interview and then fire me like half an hour later? Like, all this stuff that just kind of snowballs with this organization. It just kind of makes you feel like, if you're like an unbiased, you're not a Bears fan, would you apply for this job? Like, would you feel comfortable with what you're hearing outside when you're hearing all these press conferences? Like, it just continuously, for some reason, they just make it harder on themselves, when it's like, just make it easy, answer the questions to the best that you can. No one is asking for the money or anything like that, but just answer the easy questions and just make it pretty easy so that people don't have to, continue to question you and what you're doing.
And you know what? Kevin Warren could have said, we are committed to Ryan Poles for the long haul, for the future.
Sure.
It's as simple as that. Rather than going on a long tangent about a year is a long time, that makes me think that he does, you can read between the lines and come to whatever conclusion you want. Like, you can find quotes that make you think, oh, he's under contract for 2-3 more years. Or you can find quotes that make you think the exact opposite. Like, a year is a long time. It's just such a weird way. If I was a candidate interviewing for this job, my number one concern would be working with Kevin Warren. Like, is that a person that you want to, is that who you want your boss to be? I mean, I feel like the stuff we're hearing, we didn't learn anything new about the stadium, only that they have built great momentum toward getting their stadium done in the city of Chicago. That was the exact quote. They've built, well, maybe that wasn't the exact quote. He used the word momentum. I forget what he said. What did he say, Michael? Great
They've
momentum?
been building up to it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
There's been political momentum, which I don't know what political momentum means. I don't think that thing exists.
Nothing's
for political
changed
momentum.
in 3 years.
Right.
Nothing. Well, I mean, their focus has changed, but nothing has gotten done, whether it's Arlington, whether it's Chicago, well, especially in the city of Chicago. I know the tax stuff was in the news a couple of months ago,
right,
in Arlington, but they're not building a stadium yet, and he keeps saying they're going to start building a stadium by the end of 2025 calendar year. and the clock's ticking. We're here now. It's 2025.
And it's crazy. We can do a whole podcast about the stadium, and I know we're focusing on the coaches and that kind of stuff, but I think that's another thing, right? Like, I feel like I keep hearing, like, I think from the outside view, you have these national reporters who are they're not trying to sell the Bears job, but they're just trying to, they're saying, like, this is an attractive job. You have Caleb, you have cap space, you have draft capital. And every single time I feel like they say, and they're building a new stadium. And it's like, are they? Like, where is the stadium happening? The governor and state legislators are like, we're not giving you any money. There's no shot this is going to happen. You're likely to face a lawsuit from on the lakefront. And then you keep saying that Michael Reese is bad. Meanwhile, Arlington Heights is just standing there waiting for you. Like, again, it's another element of this organization where you're just kind of like, you brought Kevin Warren to take care of this job, and he hasn't done that. And now he's added coaching search, which someone asked him, I forget whether it was John Greenberg of The Athletic or someone else asked him, is that going to be hard to balance? And he's like, no, like, we can do it all. It's like, you haven't been able to do the first part. So what makes you encouraged that you're going to do the second part? So again, it just goes into all of this where you're just kind of like, man, if I'm a first-year coach, if I am Mike Vrabel trying to get back into it, taking my second chance, taking my Brian Flores trying to get my second chance, probably your last chance if it doesn't work, am I going to the Bears and staking my whole livelihood and my career on this? Like, it's just kind of like this. None of this sounds good right now, other than the bright, shiny object of Caleb Williams and the potential of being like, I can ignore all that. I can whatever. I can just live with that. I have Caleb Williams. I have my future quarterback. I can put him in the best spot to succeed, and I'm going to overcome all of that. I think that's just pretty much how you have to head into it if you're a coach. And obviously, it's one of 32 jobs, and it's a charter franchise, all the history we all love to hear. There are good things about it, but it's just like moments like Tuesday, you're just kind of like, man, stop getting in your own way and just let the job speak for itself for once.
If you're with us here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That's a great way to support the show. We would really appreciate that. There's my little thumb on the screen.
Hey.
If you're listening after the fact on Spotify or Apple, leave us a review. We would really appreciate a 5-star review, and keep an eye on our Twitter pages. We'll let you know when we're going to go live. You can come join us. You can see our lovely faces and our posters and our bookshelves in the background. You can join the conversation here in the comments. I want to hit a comment. Michael, you were kind of going down this road already, and I do want to touch on some of the. We got like a dozen candidates who they're interviewing. I do want to touch on a few of those that we know of, at least so far. But CJ's got a comment here. He says, Jags or Bears, which is more attractive? And I'm gonna open it up more and say, Michael, if you're a head coaching candidate, you're looking at these all 6 jobs open right now. We have the Bears, we have the Jags, who CJ mentioned there. We have who else do we have? The Saints, the Jets, the Patriots, and the Raiders. Which are maybe the most? Cowboys. Maybe the Cowboys. Although the reporting is that the Cowboys are not letting the Bears interview Mike McCarthy, but also he's not under contract yet. So they have until January 14th to figure that out down in Dallas. What are the most attractive jobs in your eyes?
I think it's probably, I'm conflicted on how you approach it. I think in the grand scheme of things, I think it is the Bears. And I obviously, the Titans I think there's a lot of things. If you're a candidate, do you want to bring your own GM? Obviously that takes away the Bears because Ryan Poles isn't going anywhere. The Titans fired their coach or their GM. The Jets don't have a GM.
I think they're the only team right now that is hiring a GM, but is keeping the coach. Is right. The Titans. Yeah. Right.
But you did hear Shad Khan, which is kind of funny yesterday in his press conference, say next to his GM when he was asked, if a coach is going to say, hey, I want to bring my own GM, is that going to be a deal breaker? And Shad Khan said, no, that's not going to be a deal breaker right next to his GM. So I think with that context, I think I think you would say that the Bears is probably the top choice, mostly because Caleb Williams is still on a rookie contract, and you have the other stuff that we talked about. I think Trevor Lawrence does obviously have a lot of untapped potential, and that is a really talented roster that kind of underwhelmed this year. And I think you could do a lot with that. And obviously, Shad Khan's going to spend money. He's going to do a lot of resources to let you succeed. But I think the thing with Trevor Lawrence is you paid him, right? Like you gave him a big contract, and eventually, like that's going to come back to bite you, and that obviously is going to hurt you with your roster construction, and that's going to hurt also with like he's got experience. He's 3 or 4 years into this thing where you've got a 1 year Caleb Williams thing where he kind of he went through some growing pains. He's gone through the rookie season, and whoever comes in, he's going to have to go through some growing pains as well in the second year. But I think you have more of a runway with Caleb in his second, third, and fourth year than you do with Trevor Lawrence at this point. So I think I talked myself into saying that the Bears job is the better job. I think that the Jags job is pretty good. The Raiders job is kind of interesting just based on seems like Tom Brady's going to be really interested.
I think that's the wild card there. Yeah.
And the Patriots job is obviously good with Drake May there, a lot of draft capital and a lot of cap space. But I would probably lean toward the Bears, but it's not a very heavy lean.
Yeah, here's my thoughts on this. If I'm a head coaching candidate, I have serious concerns about Jacksonville because of the dynamic with the head coach and the GM. I mean, Trent Baalke, sure. I don't know, man. I can't believe that they kept him. It's kind of crazy that this guy has gotten 2 GM jobs because his boss was fired and he got promoted, and they had the chance to do a clean sweep and they didn't. It's like this guy won't go away, you know. And I have serious concerns about what's just the number of coaches they've gone through the past couple of years, the whole Urban Meyer thing, all that stuff.
Sure.
I have concerns about just obviously they're not afraid to spend money. They're building, they're revamping their stadium. They got a brand new facility. They're okay with all that, and they want to win. I have serious concerns about if that's the ownership group that I want to work for. And the GM that I want to work for. Like I would be shocked if like a Ben Johnson wants to go to Jacksonville. I don't see that happening. New Orleans, I would not want to coach there. They're stuck with Derek Carr. They're in cap hell as they have been. They've been kicking the can down the road for like 10 years. And they really just need to do a full on rebuild and blow the thing up, but they won't admit that. And I really don't want to be the coach who's there when that happens. And when they come to the realization that that's the only way to fix this is to just like tear it down for a year or two and start over. I don't want to coach there. On top of that, Derek Carr is under contract for like a couple more seasons, and that's going to be a tough contract to get out of. I think the Raiders thing is kind of interesting with the Tom Brady. With Tom Brady being in ownership, being part of ownership, and obviously it seems like he has quite a sway on what they decide to do.
Right.
It's kind of like a blank canvas. You don't have a quarterback. You have some good draft capital. You have a relatively high pick there. Like, I feel like that's an opportunity to sort of start with a blank slate, so to speak. And to me, that's attractive in that way. But like obviously Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence are the best quarterbacks of these teams that don't have head coaches. And while I do love, if I was a head coaching candidate, I would love the opportunity to work with Trevor Lawrence. I have bigger concerns about that organization. At the same time, I mean, you could say the same thing about the McCaskies and the Bears. I was just saying, I don't know if I would want to work with Kevin Warren, but I mean, I feel like I just feel like having the good young quarterback is such a good place to start. And yes, it's a tough division. I get that, but these divisions change so quickly. 2 years ago, we were saying the NFC North was the worst division in football, maybe 3 years ago. These things change really, really quickly in the NFL. And so I feel like that's less of an issue, honestly.
And I think looking at the NFC North, like Detroit has obviously had a lot of great success, but most likely, Ben, you're losing both your coordinators. And obviously Dan Campbell's a great coach, and he's been able to, he found Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, right? Like he found them, put him on his staff, but you're expecting them to probably go through some regression as well, just based on having a tougher schedule, losing both coordinators. And eventually you're going to have to pay, and, the way the NFL works, the salary cap's going to come into a factor, and you're going to lose some guys, obviously, because you got some guys want to get paid eventually. But I would agree. I wouldn't be too worried about that. So I guess based on this conversation, you obviously talked about, the young quarterback. Does that mean that New England is more interesting than the Jags, just based on Drake May? Obviously, his potential, what he kind of showed you this year, a lot of cap space, a lot of draft capital. Does it pretty much become a Bears versus Patriots, for the top job?
I actually do think that the Patriots is a really good job because they have a quarterback and they want to win. Obviously, that team was really bad this year.
Yeah.
I think maybe with a better head coach, they could have won a couple more games, but I don't think that they were obviously a very good team. But is that Mike Vrabel's job to lose? Is this really an open head coaching spot? If it is, if they're taking this seriously and if they're open to Ben Johnson versus Mike Vrabel versus any other candidate, then yeah, I do think it is a really good job.
I'm really interested because this kind of dictates how this whole coaching carousel is going to go, right?
Yeah,
I think, yes, Mike Vrabel's reported to be the favorite in New England, but does Tom Brady have a sway with his former teammate? And is that kind of the reason why the Raiders decided to do what they do, where they kind of Brady's kind of listen, I can convince Vrabel to come here and we can build something really good. I'll give him the trust. I'll let him build the whole thing. And does that kind of impact? Because I think, if you're a Bears fan, you're probably looking at Johnson and Vrabel as your top two, right? When you're 1A and 1B.
Tier number one is those two guys.
But I do think when you're looking at Vrabel's likely landing spots, it is probably the Patriots or the Raiders. And then you got the Bears a little distant third. So I am interested to see, how that kind of shakes out. Because if New England doesn't get Vrabel, are they going all in on Johnson, or vice versa? If the Raiders don't do that, are they going in on that? And I think the biggest thing is obviously you've got Caleb to sell, and the Raiders don't have a quarterback to sell. And I forget what draft pick they have, but I think it's in the mid first.
They're picking at number 6. Yeah.
Okay, so based on the quarterback talent you're getting in this draft, I don't know if you're going to be able to pick your franchise quarterback by any means. But yeah, I think that'll be interesting just based on where Vrabel goes really impacts how the rest of this carousel goes. And obviously it's up to Ben Johnson where he wants to go, but a few moves here or there can really dictate, how this whole thing unfolds and where the Bears are kind of left with, at the end of the month here.
Ben Johnson and Sam Darnold with the Raiders down in Las Vegas. Let's make it happen. I think that'd be spicy. They don't have any receivers down there. They got Brock Bowers, but yeah,
right.
I do like the Patriots job if it's really open. And we didn't touch on the Jets. I don't.
What are the Jets doing?
I don't think we need to touch on the Jets. I don't know what the Jets are doing. Yeah, that list of interview candidates was pretty much all guys who have done the job. I will say this, there's also different levels of candidates. Ben Johnson can be picky. He is he is in such a favorable position. That offense was amazing again this year. Obviously, with all coordinators, at some point, the talent falls apart. You have a year where guys are injured, whatever. He's not going to be in this position forever, but he's in a really, really good spot right now where he can be choosy. If he doesn't want to coach the Jags, he doesn't have to interview down there. Whereas some other candidates, a name that came out this week that's super interesting, Matt Nagy, who seems like he really wants to be a head coach again. I feel like he's going to wind up being the coach of a team like the Jets or the Saints or the Jags. And I don't know how that will go, but I just feel like he's the type of candidate who really, if he really values being a head coach over, honestly, I think he should stay where he is for as long as possible because he can just keep winning Super Bowls with Patrick Mahomes. But if he wants to be a head coach, he's going to wind up somewhere like that.
If I'm Nagy, I would wait, right? I feel like you have a pretty, obviously Bears fans don't love Nagy, and obviously for various different reasons, but he did make the playoffs twice. He was a coach of the year, and quite honestly,
34-31 record. Yeah,
and winning record. And his quarterback was Mitch Trubisky, right? And then obviously he screwed the pooch on, dealing with Justin Fields his rookie season, throwing him out with the Browns, unprepared, unprotected. But if you're an outside team and you're looking at Nagy's resume, you're like, I've won a lot of, Super Bowls with Patrick Mahomes. I've learned a lot from Andy Reid. I learned from my experiences in Chicago, which I was now really put in a good position to succeed in Chicago. And still I won Coach of the Year and took that team to the playoffs twice. Like, it's not a terrible resume if you're an outside team looking at Nagy and you're kind of like, well, maybe you learned a lot. Maybe if we put a relatively like an average quarterback with them, he can succeed. But this podcast isn't a Matt Nagy job, whatever, a recruitment offer or anything like that. But yeah, it is just interesting just kind of see how different teams are approaching it. And for Ben Johnson, who have we confirmed so far? It's pretty much been the Bears, and he is talking to the Patriots, right? And I think the Jaguars requested him. I don't know if I saw him accept.
The reporting was that the Jaguars requested him, and then when the Jaguars, I believe did the Jaguars put out a list of requests?
They did, yeah.
I don't think he was on there.
I thought he was.
Or am I thinking of the Jets? I might be thinking of the.
You're thinking of the Jets. The Jets are not requesting back, which is just maybe they just kind of know that he's not coming here. We're not wasting our time, kind of deal.
That is so funny. That is so funny that the Jets are not requesting Ben Johnson. And maybe Ben said, "Nah, I'm good," which I if I was him, I would do. But yeah. You know what? Let's dive into some of these names that the Bears have requested. We do know this from some of the reporting from the NFL Network and from ESPN. Interviews could start as early as yesterday, Tuesday, for coaches who played on Saturday during Week 18, and then a bunch of them are going to start today. There's a bunch of different rules. Head to shawlocal.com. We have a story on all the rules if you're interested in that. Some candidates can interview this week. Some will have to wait till next week. These are all virtual interviews at this point for coaches who are still employed by other teams. I'm just going to go down the list. These are alphabetical by last name. I'm going to read off maybe a handful and see what sparks our interest here. Joe Brady, the Bills offensive coordinator, Pete Carroll, Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson. What stands out to you? Obviously, Ben Johnson is a guy who's been talked about a lot, Michael. Have your feelings changed or your thought process changed at all in these last couple of days with regards to him?
No, if I'm the Bears, it's Ben Johnson or bust. And I could be convinced Mike Vrabel. I think if Mike Vrabel has a really good plan for Caleb Williams, has a good offensive coordinator that he's guaranteed to bring in, that he has a lot of trust in and can bring in. I've heard, I think it was Albert Breer, I forget said that he would bring Tommy Reese with him, maybe from the Browns and that kind of stuff, which I don't know how excited the Bears. Obviously, I know a lot of Notre Dame fans on the podcast, I'm sure, but based on his track record at Alabama and Notre Dame. But yeah, it's Ben Johnson for me. I think, it's kind of interesting because I feel like the Bears are getting some flack from fans being like, why are we talking to so many people? Mm-hmm. Like and he talked about having a month to kind of prepare. But I'm kind of the mindset where you can't talk to these people in person until the 20th, if I remember the date correctly.
After the divisional round. Yep.
Yeah, you can't. So you're not going to be able to hire anyone until at least the 22nd, the 23rd, maybe, or whatever. If everything goes perfectly right, everyone's schedule is aligned right. So I don't think there's anything wrong in talking to a Pete Carroll, to talking to a Kafka, obviously a local guy, Northwestern and St. Reed on that kind of stuff. I think you need to learn as much as you can about your team. I think you need to, because when you're going through this interview process, a lot of guys are going to be like, well, Caleb was doing this and I see what he's kind of messing up with this motion. I would fix up his footwork. I would fix up his timing. I would fix up whatever. Or with DJ Moore, I'm just throwing out names out there just based on what people, because when you're going for a job, you're trying to show off that you know what you're talking about and you're trying to just create your plan. So if you're Brian Poles and you're the McCaskies, maybe you're like, well, I never thought of it that way, or I didn't look at it that way, or anything like that. So there's a lot of good information you can gain from these interviews. And honestly, even just down the road where maybe your OC gets hired by someone else, you're like, I like that person when I talked to them a couple of years ago. Let's go after them again after they gain some experience, right? So I think there's a lot to learn, and I'm not really concerned about the wide range of people that they're going to be talking to or anything like that. So that's why I'm not really that concerned. Sure, talk to Kafka, talk to Pete Carroll, talked to Shaw. Shaw was a very random one that I don't think we really expected, or the OC from Arizona. But at the end of the day, for me, I think it's just Brandon Johnson, and you're just Ben Johnson, and you're trying to get as much information about what's going wrong with your team and how you can fix it.
Brandon Johnson, are you referencing the Denver Broncos receiver or the Chicago mayor?
I don't know who was. Probably the mayor would make more sense just based on the stadium negotiations. But that was a slip of the tongue.
Look, if you're going to interview Mike McCarthy or try to interview Mike McCarthy, you should be interviewing Pete Carroll. Like, that's just, I'm totally okay with that. I've been saying Pete Carroll needed to be interviewed for weeks. Like, that should be a name that's on your list. If you're looking for somebody who can come in and lead your organization, that's the type of, you can criticize, his offense, his defense, all that stuff, but he is a leader type guy. And so, yes, you should be interviewing guys like that. And Kevin Warren said, like, he wants to go into this process with no preconceived notions about any of these candidates. So yeah, if you're going to do that, a wide net is okay. Michael, you touch on a couple of these. I'll read the rest of the list here. Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, he's a Chicago guy. And I mean, okay, Ryan Poles likes to bring in Chicago guys for his team. I don't know if he would do that for his head coach. I don't think that's a strong enough reason to do that, but don't dismiss that. Like, that's been something that's been important to him, bringing TJ Edwards here, Jack Sanborn, some other guys who are from the Chicago area. Like, that has been something of note in the past. And so I'll just throw that out there. Mike McCarthy, who it sounds like is not going to be allowed to interview, or at least not until he hits free agency. Todd Monken, the Ravens offensive coordinator. Drew Petzing, the Cardinals offensive coordinator. David Shaw, the former Stanford coach. That one definitely feels like it's out of left field. Although, I mean, he is very respected within the coaching realm. Arthur Smith, the Steelers OC. Gosh, I hope that doesn't happen for our sake. Mike Vrabel and Anthony Weaver is the Dolphins defensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, he was just clowning. You think that Flus press conferences were bad? Arthur Smith ones would be like in the opposite direction of bad.
Yeah, obviously you don't worry about the press conferences.
Yeah, that's not important. That is very, very relevant to our jobs. But yeah,
but still, like, you don't want to consistently have people like with Matt Eberflus or Matt Nagy. You don't want to have sound bites that consistently are like make the Bears sound dopey or anything like that. Like, there is some value to it, obviously. Like, at the end of the day, if you're winning games, like Bill Belichick was winning games and he was terrible at press conferences, okay, who cares? Like, it's funny when you're winning, it's cute when you're winning, but there is some value to it. But I think that list is interesting. You didn't say Liam Cohen, right, from the Buccaneers. I don't think they have reached out to him.
I did not, and I have not seen that. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
That's an interesting tidbit where I was kind of heading into this thing being like, obviously it's Johnson and Vrabel. I want to talk to Joe Brady. I thought Liam Cohen would be in there, obviously, with the way. I mean, maybe. Even if they can't talk to him this week, I think you'd be able to at least put in a request. So that one was interesting. Just haven't been able to see him kind of get in there. Maybe they're not as interested in what Tampa Bay is doing with their offense. But CJ, Joe Brady he's been requested, right? So I think CJ, he was requested, and I would talk to him. The Joe Brady one's kind of interesting to me if Ben Johnson, if Mike Vrabel say no to you or they go somewhere else or whatever, the fit isn't right. Joe Brady was at the top of my, second tier list. And I'd be interested to talk to him and just kind of see what his perspective is. Because I know a lot of people give him a hard time. He's like, well, anyone can do it with Josh Allen. But you saw that offense before, he took over. That was not a great offense. And he kind of reinvigorated Josh Allen. So I'd be really interested in talking to Joe Brady just with what he's been able to do there.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk about, who is at the top of tier 2. If Ben Johnson and Mike Vrabel are your tier 1, which of these coaches is up there? I think you could throw Todd Monken up there. He's done a really nice job with the Ravens. Also with a quarterback who likes to improvise, in Lamar Jackson. Maybe that could be a fit there. Obviously, with any of these coordinators, there's a bit of a leap of faith. Like, you don't know how they are as a leader of the team. You know, it's one thing to scheme up for your offense, your defense, but it's another thing to lead the team. You know, there's some names that don't really excite me all that much. I mean, I don't know much about Anthony Weaver, the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator. I honestly, I don't know much about Drew Petzing, the Cardinals offensive coordinator, other than like the Cardinals have been a decent offense the last few years, or at least since that coaching change happened and Kyler got back healthy. Brian Flores is a guy who's like another guy who I feel like if you're interviewing guys, like you should have him on your list. And it's absolutely valuable to, like, he's a guy that players will play hard for, you know, just reading some of the stuff about the Vikings defense, like those guys on the other side, they love playing for him.
Yeah.
And to go back to Mike Kafka too, I know people read Giants offensive coordinator and think, why on earth would we interview the Giants offensive coordinator? But remember, he's actually the reason why Matt Nagy has a job, because he was the Chiefs quarterback coach before getting the OC job in New York. And he left and Matt Nagy came back to be the Chiefs quarterback coach a couple of years ago. He was with the Chiefs for that whole time. You know, he worked his way up from a quality control coach to get a job on the staff. And while the Chiefs were sort of that up and coming team, and Patrick Mahomes was doing those things he did in 2018, 2019, 2020 and all that stuff. So that's not crazy to me. I know you read Giants offensive coordinator and you think, oh God, what are we doing? I don't think that's that crazy.
And I think the thing with the Giants is, you know, the Giants, I think I'm correct here. I think Dable is the one who's still calling the offense. So obviously so Kafka's just kind of, he's doing stuff obviously, but like he's not doing the play calling or anything like that. And when you look at the Giants offense, I feel like the Giants offense struggles are more the pieces than the plays, right? Like there's no there's no quarterback. Obviously you got Neighbors. He's a fantastic, you know, threat and obviously a fantastic rookie. But what else do you really have on that offense that kind of, you would be like, well, I want to see great numbers. It's like, well, the quarterback's not there and Malik Neighbors can't do it all by himself. So what are you kind of expecting? So I would look at that interview with some nuance and kind of be like, well, the Giants aren't great, but
what quarterback did they have?
Right. Like, what do you really have there that you're kind of expecting greatness?
Yeah. What quarterback did they have? Who, besides Malik Neighbors, who was making plays for your offense? And there was really nobody. That's such an interesting situation in terms of the Giants, you know, the team that didn't fire their head coach and GM. It's like those guys were brought here to usher in the post Daniel Jones era. And then they had one good year and then they decided to sign Daniel Jones to that big contract. And I mean, it almost cost them, and it still might cost them their jobs next year. You know, that's a really tough situation. I don't envy, you know, the Maras having to make that decision, because on one hand, it's like the easy thing to do, I guess, would have been to fire them. But really, like, I don't know. Committing to that. Yeah, they haven't drafted a quarterback. They haven't brought in their own quarterback. I mean, other than like, you know, the guys further down the roster, they haven't brought in their own starting quarterback. I agree with the decision to give them another year because of that. That's just me personally, but I'm going on a tangent.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants are interesting. I mean, Joe Shane and his Saquon Barkley comment on Hard Knocks is the reason why that offseason Hard Knocks is never going to happen ever again. Obviously, that didn't go the way the Giants expected it to. But I guess I know we have a few minutes left here, Sean. I was just kind of curious. They're going to go through this whole process. We're not going to know who the coach is probably for another couple weeks, 3 weeks. I guess it depends on how long teams are in the playoffs or whatever. Are you pretty much in the state of the Bears need to get a proven coach? Like they need to get the headliners. They need to get either like Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel for you to be convinced that this is going to work, or are you open to a name out of left field? Because, you know, a few years ago, I don't know how many people were talking about Kevin O'Connell, and obviously look how great that turns out. And Matt LaFleur, I know, has had some success, you know, before, but I feel like he was kind of like a mid-tier. Like, he wasn't like the face. If I remember correctly, like he was kind of like, people knew about him, but they weren't like, that's going to be a home run hire. So are you of the mindset of this search needs to end with a home run hire or it's a failure? Or are you open to if the Cardinals OC ends up being Kevin O'Connell and no one knows about him yet or anything like that?
I think as somebody who's covered this team for, the last 5-6 years, like I'm open to anything. I am also highly skeptical that anything's going to work. I think both those things are true. So I'm open to them doing whatever they think is best for this team. It would not surprise me if the name at the end of all this is not who we think it's going to be. We've seen them do that before. I think Flus was kind of in that. I mean, I know he was talked about then, but I don't know how seriously people thought they were going to hire him, early on in that process. And obviously you could say the same thing with Mark Trestman and some of the previous hires. I'm open to anything though. Like I'm open to being surprised. And that's okay if they get it right. They just have to get it right. And I'm not saying that's easier said than done. That's easy for me to say sitting on the sidelines, not being in these decisions. I would prefer, the more I've thought about this, it's like, I would prefer somebody who's done the job and is maybe the type of motivator that you want. That's maybe a Mike Vrabel, maybe a Pete Carroll, somebody who's been in that role, who's been in that job before. Because at the end of the day, like every single coordinator on this list, it's something of a leap of faith. Yeah,
it is definitely a leap of faith, and I'm kind of
Brian Flores. I'll throw his name out there too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he's got that experience. It's just interesting, and it kind of goes back to the whole thing that we kind of talked about at the beginning. Is like how much confidence do you have that this is going to go the right way? So that's kind of why I'm kind of of the mindset of go for your head, go with what is in front, the obvious choice in front of you. Where I think the Bears have gotten lucky the last couple seasons here, where yes, they traded with Carolina for the number 1 pick, but Carolina had to earn that number 1 pick last year to be the worst team. And maybe Ryan Poles knew from the beginning that roster is going to be bad. That's going to be dysfunctional. I'm choosing that team, and they're going to end up with the number 1 pick, and I'll get Caleb Williams. If so, maybe we need to be giving him more credit than we've been doing. But I think the Bears had an obvious choice in taking Caleb Williams last offseason, and I feel like they have an obvious choice here. Either do whatever you can to get Ben Johnson, do whatever you can to get Mike Vrabel, get those headliners in there, and if it doesn't work at the end of the day, okay, then it doesn't work, because I don't think anyone in a few years, if Ben Johnson ends up flailing, if he doesn't end up working, is going to give you a hard time for going for him. He's been the offensive coordinator for the best offense over the past 3 seasons. He's had a lot of success. That is a process where I think you're kind of like, it just didn't work out. And I understand a lot of Bears fans are worried about the Nagy effect, but I feel like he's much more proven than Nagy was at this point, right? I think you obviously have a lot of success, and obviously he's got a lot of great playmakers. He's not going to have that offensive line in Detroit that he would have with the Bears. But for me, it's just kind of like, it's right there. Make it happen. Do everything you can to convince these people that you need to be the place that they want to go to. And that's, for me, 1A, hire Ben Johnson. If that doesn't work, get Mike Vrabel, and then go from there. And if it doesn't work out, then sometimes it just doesn't work out. But for me, it's pretty simple that you just go for the obvious choice and you just let it happen.
Yeah, I think it is. That's a really good point, Michael. Like it's not necessarily apples to apples to compare Matt Nagy in 2018 to Ben Johnson right now, because you're right. Like Andy Reid was running that offense. Andy Reid was in charge of that thing a lot more than Matt Nagy was. I know Nagy was calling plays down the stretch there. He called the plays in the playoffs and
that didn't go well.
Famously admitted that it was his fault they didn't run the ball in the playoff game when the day the Bears hired him. But that's neither here nor there. Ben Johnson has been the guy in charge of that offense. He has been the one running that thing. We all know Dan Campbell is obviously a great leader, a great vibes guy, but he isn't in charge of the offense in the same way that Andy Reid has been. Even you could even say that for Matt Nagy now, and that's maybe a knock against him as a candidate for a head coach. That's a really good point. I mean, we'll see how this all plays out. I obviously Ben Johnson is going to be a really popular candidate, but it seems like there's interest there at least to go through the interview process with the Bears and see where that takes them. Maybe that's where this thing is heading. Vrabel is so interesting. Like, we'll see what happens in New England, but I do think like he is a guy who would, Vrabel, tough defensive guy. Like, I think Chicago would like him. I think Chicago,
they would love him.
He would be the exact type of person
Yes.
that you want for this job, whether he's right X's and O's or whatever. Like, he is the type of person and leader that you would want if you're the city of Chicago.
Yeah, he is if it is Vrabel, that's going to be your stereotypical Chicago coach. He's going to fit that mindset so well. And I think that's why a lot of people are excited about the potential of having him, right? I think that's why people, like, you hear about how much people just go around him and love him and that kind of stuff. So that would be really fun as well. But yeah, I think it all comes down to, like Russ kind of mentions in his comment, are we sure anyone wants the job? That's the biggest thing, right? Like, are we sure that people are going to want this job? I feel like we kind of made the case that people do, right? I think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what we ended up doing here in the first, what we did for 50 minutes and whether we did a good selling job for them. But I think it's an attractive job. And if you're Ben Johnson, if you're Mike Vrabel, if you're any other candidate, I think it's one of the top jobs to go after. And it'll be interesting to see what happens here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, hit the thumbs up if you're with us here on YouTube. That is a great way to support the show. We would really appreciate that. If you're listening after the fact on Spotify or on Apple, please leave us a review. Everybody head to shawlocal.com to read all of our stuff, and please consider subscribing. That's the number one best way to support us, is to head to shawlocal.com and subscribe. He's Michael Dwojak. You can find him on Twitter at mdwojak94. I am Sean Hammond. You can find me at Sean_Hammond. We will let you know when we're going live. We are gonna keep it up here during the off season. Our schedule might be a little bit more sporadic, but we definitely want to meet with you at least once a week here during this coaching search. So we will let you know when we're going to go live next time, and keep an eye out for that. This has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your week.